So in today's video, I'm sharing 5 steps to setting boundaries with your adult children. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through exactly how you can start to identify your boundaries and set them so that you can preserve the relationship with your adult child. If you're new, my name's Michelle Ferris. I'm a psychotherapist and I love helping people create relationships that work. So what are boundaries? Boundaries are basically limits you set for yourself that determine what behaviors you will and won't accept in any relationship. And these are really important because without boundaries, your relationships aren't going to be healthy. You're going to end up not taking good care of yourself in relationship, and I don't want that for you. Boundaries are not about getting your adult children to change. That's the biggest misconception about boundaries. They're really more about what you do than what they do. You can always ask them to change their behavior, but that's more of a request. So in this video, we're going to talk more about what healthy boundaries are. If you've ever tried setting a boundary with your adult child, say me too in the comments. This video is going to help. So the first step for setting boundaries with your adult children is I want you to write a list of what boundaries you want to set. So when it comes to boundaries, I want you to think about 2 things. What are some things you want to stop doing for your adult children? And what are some things you want to start doing for yourself? Because that is going to help guide the process. Now, the other part I want you to think about is it doesn't mean you have to set the boundary today. This is just a list for you about what you want to accomplish, say in the next year, because boundaries need to be realistic in order to set them effectively. So for instance, do you want to give them less money? Do you want to not be treated badly in your relationship with them? What are some things you want to stop or start doing in order to take better care of yourself and preserve the health of that relationship? By the way, boundaries are not about saying no all the time. If you struggle with codependency or people pleasing, setting boundaries is not going to be easy, but these are going to be very bite-sized baby steps for you that's going to make a difference. Now, while saying no is an important boundary, you don't have to start there. Instead, I want you to do this. I want you to identify areas where you can pull back and do less for them. For instance, do you want to give them less financial support? Do you want to walk away before they mistreat you? Do you want to not be their childcare anymore? What are some things you want to start doing less of? Again, it doesn't mean you're going to say no completely and stop helping them, because I know, especially if you're codependent like me, you really have a big heart and you want to help your adult children. But we need to see how helping them may be actually hurting them. So what I want you to do is I want you to write a list of all the things that you normally do for them, but you're going to do a little bit less, because it's not about doing it perfectly the first time. And if you start doing a little bit less for them, that's still a baby boundary, because that's going to help give you confidence so that you can eventually do less and less over time. Boundaries aren't black and white. They're sometimes little micro commitments that we make to ourselves to do something a little bit different. And that's how you're going to gain confidence over setting boundaries. Now, this also means changing your definition of what you think loving your child means. Because loving your child doesn't mean doing everything for them or bailing them out when they get into trouble. Loving your child means showing them how to be emotionally and physically independent from you so that they can live a happy, functional life. That's what most parents want. But if we have our own unhealthy dependency on our child, that's going to get in the way. So I really want you to consider Al-Anon or CODA, both 12-step meetings that deal with issues of emotional dependency, because that is going to help you set better boundaries in the future. Doing less for your adult child is also going to model healthy self-care, because part of what we need to remember, even with our adult kids, is that we're always modeling through our own behavior. And as you learn to set boundaries, say no, and put your needs ahead of theirs, which if they're an adult, that's often appropriate, that's going to show them what healthy behavior looks like. So the next step in setting boundaries with your adult children is I want you to track the results of what happened and do some writing around that. For instance, how did it feel to do a little bit less? Did you have a lot of trouble doing that? Did you feel super guilty? Did you renege and decide, I can't do this at all and go into a panic. That's okay. Part of what we want to do is we want to build that muscle so that you can start to feel more confident in setting boundaries. But we want to track the results first. So I want you to do some writing about how it felt to set the boundary. What did you do? What did you not do? What do you wish you could have done differently? Because whenever we practice a new behavior, it's not going to look pretty. It's going to be a little bit messy, and that's okay. Boundaries are no different. But I also want you to track what did work. Did you get some time or energy back? Did you feel less overwhelmed by setting that boundary? I want you to also look at the positives, because boundaries are meant to help you feel better. They're going to help you preserve your time and your energy. And if they're doing one or both of those things, then they're working. Another aspect of setting boundaries with anyone, especially your adult children, is it's going to give you some information about that other person that isn't always pleasant. For instance, if you try to set a boundary and they get mean and nasty, or they try to make you feel guilty, or they bring up past mistakes that you've done, that is really telling. That is much more telling about who they are as people versus who you were as a parent. Because let's face it, you are not responsible for your adult child's life as it exists right now, because they have made their own choices since becoming an adult. You may also learn some really hard lessons about who your child really is. Maybe they are in active addiction, or they're pretty manipulative, or they're not really nice to you. Those are some truths that you may need to face when you're looking at their reactions. Because again, their reactions are more about who they are and their own coping mechanisms than who you are. Because if you have been a parent that has made mistakes, me too, you're trying to rectify them by setting boundaries today and doing something healthier today. And that's how you're a good parent right now, right in this moment, because you're willing to watch this video. So whatever information you learn about your adult child by setting boundaries, I want you to use that to set more realistic expectations. Because when we expect our child to act better than they actually do, we're setting ourselves up for disappointment and frustration, and I don't want that for you. If you can come to terms with how your child really is with you, that's going to help you eventually get to some acceptance. Because when I accept my child for who he is, I'm much better off. But when I expect my son to be something different than who he is, then I'm super frustrated. And so I too am right there with you setting boundaries, and having realistic expectations is a huge piece of it. Next, I want you to write down all your fears around setting boundaries with your adult child, because most of them are false evidence appearing real, which is a great acronym from 12-step programs. Because if you're assuming the worst will happen, it probably won't. Now, if you have a child that has narcissistic tendencies or is in active addiction, then yeah, some of this may be really hard for you. But most of the time, our fears don't really come to pass. Because let's face it, if you're afraid to set a boundary because you're afraid they're going to leave you, you need to really challenge that fear. Is it really realistic that your child will never speak to you again if you say no? Most likely that's not the case. Now, they may have a period of adjustment when we start practicing new behavior like setting healthy boundaries. There is a likelihood of the other person reacting negatively, but that also is part of codependency recovery, is to realize who is going to respect and honor you for setting boundaries and who isn't. Just because your child doesn't want you to set boundaries doesn't mean you shouldn't set them, because boundaries are about keeping relationships healthy. Next, I want you to start practicing detachment with any behavior that isn't okay with you. For instance, if your child starts treating you badly, or they start screaming or name calling you, I want you to leave the room. There's no reason to stay and listen to someone who is mistreating you. That is absolutely a behavior we do not want to feed. We want to actually remove ourselves as quickly as possible so that they get the message that it's not okay to do that. Detaching is really about removing yourself from a toxic situation or wanting to change an outcome or behavior. And one way to do this is to create a mantra in your head. This is not my problem. They can solve this themselves. I don't have to interfere. Something like that that's going to keep you from getting involved in their business. Because the more we try to change and fix our adult child's reality, the more they're not going to learn how to do it for themselves. So we're really handicapping them in a way that prevents them from being a healthy adult. And I know you don't want that for them. So some examples of detachment might be leaving the room, not giving advice, being quiet, letting them have their consequences, not rescuing them from their own behavior. Detaching is really the silent, powerful boundary that is going to let them live their own life. And that is a boundary that all of us can start setting today because it doesn't require any words. It just requires you being willing to remove yourself and let them have their own reality. And remember, boundaries don't mean that you don't care about your adult child. It means that you actually care enough to set a healthier example. So the next thing I want you to do is I want you to go watch my video on how to show support because that's going to help you connect with your child even more. Thanks so much.